In this episode of the Exploring Information Security podcast, how to automate information security with Python.
Computers now have primary control of critical functions.
Houston, recommend vector transfer.
Your go for APU shutdown on time.
Roger, go for deploy.
Nice to be in orbit.
Welcome to the Exploring Information Security podcast, where you will learn, explore, and grow your security mindset. I'm your host, Timothy D. Block, and in this episode, we will be exploring how to automate information security with Python. With me to do that is Mark Baggett, CTO of SANS Internet Storm Center. Show notes can be found at exploresec.com/EIS. You can support the podcast by donating. There's a donate button on the podcast page. You can also sign up for the newsletter. Feedback for the show is also always welcome and helps support the podcast. You can reach out to me at timothy.dblock@exploresec.com. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. If you're going to connect with me on LinkedIn, please let me know that you listen to the podcast, because I will happily connect. Rate the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. That's how it helps grow the show. So this was a really good one with Mark. I've known Mark for years at this point, and he's always been kind of the Python guru, especially for information security. I mean, he's essentially built 2 SANS courses, as you'll hear him talk about. If you'd like to sign up for those courses, you can absolutely check out the website, exploresec.com/EIS, and look for the Python podcast, and where we talk about all the different stuff and his courses as well. I mean, we get into a little bit of his journey into it, and then also like what you want to automate. And it's not as much as you think, but it is kind of across the gamut, whether you're an executive, whether you're a defender, where you're offensive. It can be really useful, and it is one of the most popular programming languages out there, and it's really super easy to get into. So definitely something to check out, especially if you're looking to automate. I automate as much as possible at work, and it makes my job a lot easier. So with that, let's go ahead and get into it.
That's where SANS recording studio is for them to do their different on-demand classes. So when you take a course to on-demand, we do those recordings in Nashville.
I didn't know that, but that makes sense. I mean, we've got a lot of music studios. We were driving around Nashville last weekend, and just went by some houses that were like, this is a recording studio, where we had all these made. It's just literally a house.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. So is this like a new course then, or just a new recording?
Now, well, all SANS classes are updated rather frequently, and so this is just a recording with new content to 573, my automating information security with Python class.
That's cool. Yeah. And then do you have an advanced one too? Is that what I saw?
Yeah, 673, which is the follow up to that, is probably a year and a half old now. But
yeah. So how did that get started?
Well, I had a lot of people asking for the class. Hey, 573 is really popular with the people that come. I think people, have taken other Python classes and found them to be tedious or not necessarily focused on information security, and a lot like the college assignments that you had, go off and do this thing. And I was very intentional about putting 573 together in a way that was focused on information security tasks, and that was fun and engaging. So it's a lot of hands-on labs. And so, I just had a lot of people asking, hey, can we do a 673? Can you do an advanced class? And so after enough years of people asking, SANS said, all right, well, this is probably something that you should do, Mark. And I was like, I don't really want to do it. And they said, well, you really should do it. And so they twisted my arm, and I created the course. And I think that the 15 people that were asking SANS to come up with a new course have all taken it now. So they're like, all right, Mark, we're gonna cancel your class if more people don't start coming. I'm like, I told you I didn't want to write the advanced class.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Gotcha. That so well, like what kind of tasks are you automating with Python?
So in the 573 class, we start out with how to manipulate strings, how to read files, how to work with lists and dictionaries, and just simple introduction to coding stuff. And there's 2 days of that workshop of introduction to the concepts. But I didn't want to have people who already knew Python coming in and being bored for those 2 days. So there's also a CTF that goes along in parallel with the course, so that what happens is if people know Python, they come in and they accelerate I'll have people that finish the first 2 days of material in the class in about the first 4 to 6 hours. And then they'll start on working on days 3, 4, 5, and then the capture the flag stuff that's at the end of the course. And so if somebody finishes all of the labs that they have in the course, then they get a prize. They get a coin for doing that. And so there's also a day 6 CTF, like most SANS classes have, but you actually have 2 CTFs in 573. So after the essentials of how to do coding, we talk about how to process files like text files, UTF-8 files, binary files. We will automate log analysis. So day 3 is themed after being a network defender. So you put on the role of a network defender who has to parse through a bunch of logs as a result of a compromise. And there's a compromise scenario. You have to analyze the log and figure out, what the IP address of the attacker was, or where your intellectual property was exfiltrated onto the internet. And after you do that with logs, then we turn around and we do it with packets. So how to open up PCAP files and to process PCAP files to pull out things and generate intelligence on it. Then that's the defensive day. On our forensics day, we build a sniffer. So really, forensics, we really talk about carving things out of binary streams. And so the way we do that is we write TCP dump, right? We write a sniffer that has a protocol parser in day 4. And then we also another thing that we talk about in day 4 is interfacing with web APIs. So logging into websites, submitting information through APIs, and gathering that information to enrich your logs and other intelligence that you've been gathering off of those. And that's our forensics day. And then day 5, we talk about automating offense, where we build a backdoor that communicates over TCP. We'll talk about networking concepts like how to send and receive large amounts of data over a TCP socket. And really, the network defenders get so much out of this because when you understand it at the programming level, then what you've always seen in packets makes sense. Like, the fact that the TCP window size has everything to do with when the developer calls, this function in their program, which is reading information out of the buffer, and the size of the window size is actually the amount of data that's left in the buffer on the receiving side. Once you see those things at the code level, then analyzing the packets makes so much more sense. And so there's a lot of things that just come together when you look at this stuff at a low level that helps you outside of coding. But we'll talk about communicating over TCP, UDP, how a server works and how a client works. Then we build a backdoor that has interpreter-like functionality where you can load modules into memory after the backdoor has launched on a remote system, and how to get a minimal client on a machine that's not going to throw off AV signatures and things like that, so you can gain access and then add things like uploading and downloading additional pieces of malware, launching them. So we build a dropper with Meterpreter like functionality to load different modules and things like that in our day 5. And then day 6 is CTF.
And so the CTF, what does that entail?
We break down into teams, and it's much like the assignments for days 1 through 5. Here's a series of labs that you're going to work through, and whichever team has the most points at the end of the team also wins coin. So it's just an opportunity to work through labs without having the answers there in front of you and work towards a goal with teams. But I was very intentional with the CTF day as well to make sure that it's self-paced, right? So you're going to have people who don't know coding that come to this class. I would say 20 to 30% of the people who take this class, this is their first programming class, right? They don't know what a function is or a variable is. And so I didn't want them to go into a CTF or come to CTF day and say, you know what, I don't feel like I'm going to be able to really contribute to the team. I'm going to be holding people back. So I'm just going to not participate. So the CTF is very much structured where there's easy CTF questions, there's difficult, and then there's hard, and they're all worth more points, right? So, if somebody who's new to coding, decides not to participate, then they're really just denying a team the maybe 3 or 4 1-point questions that they might have solved, which is actually really, in the end, most of these CTFs come down to just a few points because the PyWare server builds fair teams based upon how people have been doing throughout the week, rather than people just picking their own teams and having one team that just slaughters everybody else. Then it builds fair teams out of the people that are going to be there. So that's kind of the way that the 573 class is structured. And then 673 picks up from there. We talk about like multi-threading, multi-processing. We talk about serialization, and and all of these things are not just how to implement them, but how to attack them and how to secure them. As a matter of fact, I've got a CTF, and so are we still just talking, or are we? No,
we're going. Yeah, I do the thing where I just hit record and we just start having a conversation, man. I found it just goes so much better.
Okay, yeah. I didn't know if we were still, just catching up and talking, or if we were. This was going to be. So I'll tell you, because this is something I want to be sure that we tell people about, is that I've got a couple of free resources coming up for learning to code in Python.
Oh, nice.
And one of them right now is the CTF that I've got. It's a little 2-page CTF. Both of the pages have a YouTube video that explains to you how the attacks that you're going to be using work, and how you implement them. And this is a 673 based topic, which is on pickle attacks, Python pickle attacks, which are serialization attacks. Now every language has serialization vulnerabilities, but Python's is pretty cool and pretty fun to exploit. And you'll often see little CTFs will throw together a pickle exploit where it says, here's something that's vulnerable. And the way you exploit those is pretty cookie cutter in most systems. But the CTF that I've got out there today is not. It is, it starts out with the cookie cutter kind of exploit this pickle vulnerability that you would see in most CTFs that are out there, but then it goes further. And I've actually taken that pickled object or that same pickled website, and I've secured it using some of the techniques that we teach in 673, so that I can detect when it's being exploited, and then it's quote unquote secure. But as you being an information security professional with many years of experience, who I've known for a long time, when you heard me say it's secure, you probably go, yeah, sure, it's secure. It's secure in some circumstances, and that's exactly what's happening here. Is I've secured it against the most common exploit, but I'm still receiving untrusted code and loading it into a Python object. And so the second stage of that is manipulating the object itself rather than taking advantage of the cookie cutter vulnerability that's in there. So it's more a more advanced version of that attack. And so you can try both of those right now at the CTF I've got stood up. I can give you the URL for that, but it's serialization.crabdance.com :573 673 673 being the course that teaches that. So 6730. And like I said, there's a good 20-minute video or 2 10-minute videos in there that'll explain the concepts and walk you through at least the first part of it. And if you get stuck on the first stage, which is really kind of the cookie cutter CTF, there is an answer in the HTML source. You can view source and you'll find a string that you could just paste in there as the answer and get to stage 2, which is where the interesting learning happens that I don't think you'll find elsewhere on the internet.
No, that's good. I do, before I'm going to dive more into some of this other stuff, but I've never heard of a pickle attack, or if I did, it's been a while. Like, what is like an actual, and why is it named pickle attack?
Yeah, so it's interesting that in the last, 8 months, this issue of pickle attacks has become something that's been brought to the forefront in a lot more interesting. There's with AI, as you probably know, Python is largely the language of choice for implementing artificial intelligence learning models, and a lot of AI calculations are all done in Python. And many of the large language models that we have out there today rely on PyTorch, which is a Python module that will allow you to do advanced calculations and create what they call PyTorch machines and things like that. And PyTorch relies on Pickle, which is a serialization module that Python has. And serialization is just a process of taking bytes, binary data that we have in variables or objects that we have inside of the programming language and turning it into a string, right? Into just text that I could write to a file or transmit across a network. Now, PowerShell just kind of does this for you automatically. PowerShell has these pipelines where on Linux, you have to grep and you have to cut and you have to do other things to take text and extract the components of text from these things. But in PowerShell, everything is an object. So you can take the output of one PowerShell thing and then pipe it into another PowerShell applet, which will automatically have access to all the attributes because it passes things around as objects. Well, how can I take something out of PowerShell that's an object and then move it over to another Windows computer that also has PowerShell and load it up so that it's still an object and not just text there? You do that through serialization. JSON is JavaScript object notation. It's where you can take the contents of a variable in Java or JavaScript, export it to a string, which we typically see as squiggly brackets, key colon value, and then you can send it across a network, store it in a database, write it to a hard drive, and then another JavaScript program could read it, load that variable back up, and have that variable restored in memory in JavaScript. And Python does the same thing, but it does it through a module named Pickle. And what does Pickle stand for? Yeah, I don't know. It's a. And
is it spelled like actual pickle, or is it like PICKLE?
PICKLE. Yep.
Okay,
PICKLE.
right. Just whoever created that decided to name it Pickle.
Yep. Yeah, but it makes for cool exploits. Like I think the recent LLM attacks we've seen are deadly pickle or death by pickle or
that makes sense. Yeah.
The evil pickle. There's all kinds of interesting names that can come up, and of course, there's different variations of this module like dill and pickle jars and things like that. So, of course, the community extends that and has fun with it. But But in the end, all of the different serializations that you see out there that are available for Python, that are native to Python, that aren't using like JavaScript, end up relying on this pickle engine, which is notoriously vulnerable to this serialization attack. And the serialization attack is nothing more than Python. It's not a vulnerability, it's a feature, right? Python will allow you to take an object that has executable code in it and turn it into a string and then load it back up into another machine. And so if I just put malicious code into that pickled object, then I can move it there. But I do a much better in-depth explanation of this with actual code samples and walking through building an exploit on that serialization.crabdance.com/6730. So there's a 20-minute YouTube video where I'll show you actually building an exploit from scratch on there and some of the limitations of it, like trying moving it from Windows to Linux and Linux to Windows and show you where those things break. And that's in the first stage of that.
Gotcha. So why Python? Like, because you've been doing Python for a while. I mean, clear you made a SANS course entirely out of Python too. Yeah. But like, so why Python?
Well, Python wasn't my first programming language or even my first choice. I mean, I cut my teeth on C and I cut my teeth on Pascal back in the day, but C, it was Pascal, C, and assembly language was it for me, right? And then, probably sometime shortly before you and I first met, when I was a chief information security officer for a media company. You probably remember I had a need to automate some stuff, and I don't know if you knew this, but Pascal is no longer the language of choice. And I didn't want to do it in C and I didn't want to do it in assembly because, there's those take a lot of time. And what I needed to do was log into a bunch of different websites, log into a bunch of different databases and pull back statistical information to help me as a CISO to generate all my key performance indicators and things like that. So I'm like, all right, well, I used to be a coder. I think I'll have to brush off those skills and do that. Let me see what's out there. And about this time, Python 2.2, 2.1 was the language of choice. And it was a very popular language at the time, or still growing in popularity. Not nearly what we see today, but I needed to automate some stuff. And so I looked around. I said, I think I'll do it in this Python thing, right? It's named after a snake. It's got to be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Turns out that it's much cooler than that because it's not named after a snake. It's named after Monty Python's Flying Circus, the comedy troupe. And so you got all these Monty Python jokes that are embedded in it. So I decided I was going to learn it, and I did. And then I found it to be really useful, and even as a CISO, just to automate little tasks around the office and do things for myself. But why Python today? I mean, by most measures, Python is by far like almost double the percentage of popularity of every other programming language that's out there. Whether you look at the number of projects that are being posted to GitHub, I think you can go to, what is it? The Programming Language Popularity Index. I think PIPL is something that GitHub maintains, and I think you'll see that Python's nearly 30% of those things versus the next most popular languages in the low teens. And I'm pulling numbers out of Alt Orifice here, so whenever you publish this, we'll just pretend like my numbers were correct at the time.
No, I mean I actually just pulled up the website, and you're right. Like it's one. It's at the top of the ranking. It's got like a 30% share. And then the next one's Java, which is a little bit surprising, but that's only at like 15, 16%. So it is and then it just goes down from there. So it's got, like, to your point, it's got a large user base. It's got a lot of popularity. So
yeah. So and that's GitHub, but there's other ways you could measure it. You could look at which ones are universities teaching. You could look at which questions are being posted to Stack Overflow. right? And by every measure that's out there, Python is the most popular, most widely used language, and also continuing to grow. With AI being implemented in Python for the most part, then it's just getting more and more popular. So I feel rather blessed and fortunate that I was there at the time and coding in Python when SANS said, "Hey, why don't you?" Actually, the immediate customer was the United States, the U.S. government. They had a need for this course, and I had the ability to write it, and so it was initially developed for the government as strictly an offensive course, and then after a while, we converted it to a class that incorporated forensics and also defensive elements to it. And I'd say network defenders make up the majority of the people that are taking the class today.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, that is great that the course takes it from all sides. And even if you're on one side, seeing the offensive side is great. If you're on the offensive side, you can see the defensive side too. I just think having both those viewpoints, at least in my career, has really helped out with to your point, understanding some of those concepts. So
yeah,
I think you're dead on there. But so is this course self-paced? Because it sounds like you've got it modularized, and it's for anybody that's even a beginner or someone that's been using Python for a little bit. Because you said like people can blow through the content pretty quickly if they know something, but if not, they can kind of just get started. So is it self-paced, or like are you teaching, or like how does that work out?
Yeah, so that is really the result of just kind of the way SANS works, right? SANS can list prerequisites. Hey, you should know these things before coming to this class, but they don't really enforce them on anyone. So anybody could sign up for a 700 level class at SANS, which they start at, they've got a 200, they've got a couple of 300s. 401 is really the introduction to information security class. So 400 is like the first year post-college graduate, but the 700 level class is like a PhD level class. 600 level classes are very difficult classes. And this is a 500 level class, which is more difficult than the 400 levels, but you also have 504 incident handling, 503 packet analysis, which are some of the most popular classes that most people know about. So it's about there in difficulty, but there's no prerequisites. So if I wrote a course that just said, we're just going to jump right in and learn how to automate things with defense and forensics and offense, then the 20% of the people that came to the class would be very, very unhappy. So it does start with, let me tell you what a variable is, and let me tell you how to write a function and how arguments are passed and what is returned and how to write a module. And then now that we know how to write a module, how to import a module and call things, and how to write a program and how to debug programs and use an IDE. And those things are covered in the first 2 days. Now, 2 days as an introduction to Python is a very aggressive pace. So if you're new to coding, then learning that stuff in 2 days is doable, but it's very much like drinking from a fire hose, which you often hear used as an analogy for SANS classes. So if you come in there with some programming experience, then you get more out of the class. But the way that all the labs are broken down is when it comes to, I'll talk about how strings work and in Python, and then I'll say, okay, it's lab time. And then I turn you loose on labs, and there's 15 different labs on manipulating strings. And if you're new to coding, you're going to get through 3 or 4 of those. And if you've been coding for a while, then you might get through almost all of those, or some people get through all of those in that section. And then we move on to talk about dictionaries or lists. And then we say it's lab time. And if you're new to coding, you'll get through 3 or 4 of the labs in that section. And then if you've been coding a while, you might finish all of them and even move on to the next one. And so the labs are small and modular. And so I tell people that if you've completed about 25% of the labs in a section, that's normal, right? I would say that's what a normal person can complete in 20 in, if I give you 30 minutes for a lab and 15 labs, and a normal person can maybe finish 7 of them, right? Or 5 of them. But if you already know coding when you get in there, then you're going to finish more of them. So that's how I do the self-paced version of that. And then it's a matter of setting expectations, because everybody is always disappointed after 30 minutes and you say time is up and you only got through 25% of them. That's just universally. So my approach, rather than, there's kind of 2 ways you can approach these labs. You can give people 30 minutes and then give them a lab that you're sure that everybody can finish in 30 minutes. And then when you're finished with the lab, then you sit around and browse the internet and check your work email after you finish the lab. I didn't want to do that. So my approach is I give everybody more labs than they should be able to do in 30 minutes. And then everybody's unsatisfied when they don't finish all the labs. But you get to take home those additional labs and and continue your learning afterwards, which I think is a better approach. Because one of the questions I would often get asked is, this was cool. I want to keep learning, building my skills. What should I do next? And so for most students, I can say, well, you can finish the other 60 labs that they have in the course that you didn't get to yet. Because most people will finish about half of the labs in during the week that we get together.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I like that. That you've given people some more areas, because I imagine, you can go pretty deep into the Python world, especially when you're talking about like automation. Yeah,
and if you do finish all of the labs where we talk about, I think there's maybe 85 labs that are supported by the material that's in the book, and then the last 40 labs or so are advanced, right? Oh, let's build an AES encrypted payload, or guess the cryptography key that's being used on these kind of things. And those are presented as CTF challenges in the live classroom, and in the on-demand classroom, they're presented as bonus learning, where I walk through those concepts and explain them as things. So actually, if you take the class on demand, there's a lot more learning that can come out of it and on demand, because there's actually 7.5 days of class material that's recorded for on demand. Oh, I lost microphone or audio again.
No, that was me. No. Oh, I had to take myself off mute.
No explanation needed.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're automating stuff with Python, like, how do you identify what you should automate?
Well, that's a great question, because I kind of alluded to the fact that the first thing I did with Python was, as a CISO, write a tool to go out and pull KPIs. And it had been a while since I did any coding, so I had to dust off some of these skills, and I'm learning new syntax for Python and things like this. And probably once a month I had to pull together all of these KPIs, like how many patches we deployed, and how many antivirus engine updates were up, and how many incidents did we log, how many passwords did users have to get reset by the help desk. There's just all these statistics on AV engine updates, AV pattern updates, patches deployed, number of alerts in our firewalls. And I had to log into like 10 different systems and manually navigate web interfaces to get these statistics on this report. So this was like, I'm going to automate this thing. And maybe it took me 2 days to go through manually every single month into all these different systems and to update my Excel spreadsheet with these different KPIs, which was painful. So I'm going to automate it. And it took me a month, at least a month, probably a month and a half, to learn the code, to put these things together. And so I did the math there, and I'm like, okay, 2 days once a month. And I just spent 45 days on this I'm gonna come back with, it's going to take me 4.5 years of running this report before I break even on the time that I wasted writing this stupid Python program. And so then the next month comes around, and I ran my report, and it generated my Excel spreadsheet in 5 minutes, and I had 2 days blocked off on my calendar to go through these KPIs. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do for the next 2 days? And so, rather than just browsing YouTube, I said, well, let me take a look at this report, because now programming is fun, right? At this point, I've got this skill, I've got this new hammer, and I'm just looking for a nail, right? So let me just take a look at this report and see if there's anything that I could add to it that would make it more impactful to the other executives. And there's no way I would have spent you're already spending 2 days collecting this information. There's no way I would have spent another 5 minutes getting data if it was still a manual process. But now I ran this process, and I actually took the time to sit back and say, well, gosh, I wonder what the other competitors in my vertical space are doing, and whether or not they've had incidents. Right. And so I wrote a little thing that would go and pull news stories about competitors and look for headlines. I wonder, if I could take these things and extrapolate those into the number of password resets and extrapolate that into a cost, right? Man hours. And so I added these additional elements, which, I probably spent the entire next 2 days, right, in making this report better than it was before. But the difference of the impact of showing this report was like night and day, right? When I took in this thing that wasn't just the numbers, but actually gave context and meaning to those numbers, it just was like a magic budget button, right? That, oh wow, so I was asked the question, what do you need in order to fix that number right there that's in your report? And I was like, well, gosh, I guess I could use these resources. We could hire another person. That would be great. And so what do I automate? As a general rule, I would say if you have to do it over and over again every single month, then you should automate it, right? And even if you don't think that you're going to break even initially on it, then automating it just frees you up to be creative, to find other useful ways of making use of that information. And so if you do it more than once, well, maybe not more than once, more than 2 or 3 times in over a repeated period, then I would automate it.
Yeah, no, I've done something similar with my monthly stuff where I have gone and pretty much automated all my metric pulling. So, and like to your point, it took me a month, at my new job to get all that stuff together, figure out what metrics. But now it's just like you said, it's 5 minutes and I'm done. And then I'm able to go off and do something else. And I'm constantly trying to even just improve upon it. It's like, oh, well, maybe I can add this. Maybe I could do, this with it. So,
yeah.
But what I did too, and I imagine you knew this was coming, 45 days would be a lot shorter now because of AI. Like, are you using AI or seeing like how that's impacting? Because I that's what I did is I just had AI, and if I got an error message, I fed it and it would try to do it again, and then I'd run it again. And so it's like, and it made this really long thing that I was like, this would have taken me, to your point, 45 days to write this. And it took me, 2 hours.
Yeah. So yes, I use AI all the time. Okay. But there's a pretty good XKCD commercial cartoon. Of course, XKCD, right? Gets right to the root of everything that has ever happened. But there's a great XKCD commercial that shows in one pane, it shows before AI. Developer spends, 4 days writing code and 2 hours debugging it. After AI, developer spends 30 seconds writing code and 4 days debugging it, right? And it comes down to Look, so I've used AI to write things where I didn't understand the language, where I didn't understand the functions that I was calling, and it was like you said. I would have it generate code, and I'd try and run it, and it would generate an error message, and I would say, "No AI, that didn't work. Here's the error message that I got back." Right, and but I would have to first go through and sanitize the error messages, removing any kind of data that I didn't actually want the AI to have. Yeah. Right, and then post that back there, and it would say, well, okay, try this. And I would, go through this iterative process where I'd never really understood the code. And I've been in that cycle where then I just stopped at some point. And I was like, well, let me actually go and read what these functions and these libraries are intended to do and how they're supposed to work. And when I understood them, then I could see the error messages that the AI didn't, right? Because AI is just chewing up all of these different programs that it has out there and throwing together this text as to what the most logical thing to follow that previous thing was. Mm-hmm. And so when you understand the language, you can see the errors, but I use AI all the time to write simple functions. I have used AI. Hey, here's a function that I wrote. How would you write this? And come up, seen some pretty creative things. I'm like, oh wow, that's going to make me a better programmer right there. Just the thing that I learned from it. So AI certainly has a place. Microsoft's or GitHub Copilot. Oh my goodness. The integration into Visual Studio Code, it learns my style of coding, and it learns the functions that I've already written in my program. And it will often just write the next. I can type the definition. I'm going to write a function that does this and takes in this, and it just writes out the whole function for me. And I'm just like, oh, this is amazing. So yes, AI is awesome. It makes programming so much easier and faster, but I don't think we'll ever get around. You have to understand the fundamental of what this thing is supposed to be doing and how to interact with these libraries. And more importantly than that, the fundamental skill of how do I learn the correct way of interacting with this module? Because, it's a much more valuable skill to understand how to go and get the information than it is to just have the information. So yeah, it's more, and what I've likened it to is you become more of an editor. So it takes that first draft or first swing at it, and then you want to go in and adjust it based on your needs or your understanding. Yeah, yep. Or I use it the other way as well, where I natively speak Python. English is a second language to me. Right? I worked for a long time with Doug Burks, yep, who has impeccable grammar. As a matter of fact, Doug would always tear my emails up. Before I sent them out, I would say, "Hey, Doug, can you take a look at this?" And he would just red letter my emails to death. He's like, "No, you just don't even know how to speak English, Mark." But AI makes me seem much smarter than I am now, because I can take those emails and say, "Hey, could you rewrite this for me?" And it's like, "Sure." And I'm like, "Okay, that's a little too smart. Could you rewrite it? Could you rewrite it and make me sound like maybe an 8th grader?" That's funny. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I think I've covered everything. Anything else you want to talk about or mention as far as like automating information security with Python? Let's see. I do have a free workshop coming up. Okay. So that's at the end of this month on the 31st, and that's going to be a 2-hour hands-on workshop that you're going to get to actually create accounts in the SANS lab environments, where you can log in and begin working through some of those self-paced labs. And I put together a collection of labs from both 573 and 673. And the goal of this workshop is to, one, let you try some of the labs and see what the lab environment is like, experience that self-paced nature that I talked through, and figure out, are you ready for 673? which I've got running in Las Vegas coming up this September, and also CDI. And I think that's actually the first opportunity to take this class at a large SANS national event. And at this point, I think it's probably going to be one of the last, right? Because the advanced programming class, there's a small audience for people who are ready to take on the advanced one, and so I don't think that class is gonna survive another 2 years, honestly. But so this workshop is this September, and that's an opportunity for people to go and try the labs. The other thing I'd love to talk to you about a little bit is the Infosec Tool Shed.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Have you heard of this thing at all?
Yeah, no, I watched it. I believe I watched the one with Doug, because I think that was one of your first ones that you did. But I love it because it's going through different topics that I think get forgot about.
Yeah, it's been an amazing, enjoyable experience for me to get to go and talk with, some of my heroes in information security and just hear from them, why they did what they did, and kind of the backstory of it is last year, Dennis Ritchie, the guy who wrote C, died. And I thought, man, it would have been really interesting just to talk to him and see, why did you write C? What was the catalyst for you developing the C program? And I'm sure that's documented somewhere in a book or some other type of media that nobody uses anymore. I wish there was just a YouTube series where I could go out there and hear from Dennis Ritchie what his struggles were, why he did this, what was his project that he was trying to work on that he needed the C interpreter, and so then I decided, well, I think I'm going to do that for InfoSec. And so Doug being a good friend, he and I actually go to the same church together. I asked Doug, hey, let's do this episode for me. Tell me about the origin of Security Onion. And this might be the only episode of Infosec Tool Shed that I ever do, just warning. We'll see how it goes when I put this thing together. But I put it together and enough people watched. I'm like, all right, I'll do another one. But since then I've got to talk to Dildog and Sardistic about back orifice and back orifice 2K. I got to talk to Van Houser, the guy who wrote THC Scan and THC Hydra, and many other tools about his origin story, about how he did those. And one of the amazing things about that is THC Scan was a war dialer. You probably remember it. But it was a war dialer. It was his very first program that he ever wrote in Pascal. So that was his project. I'm going to learn how to code in Pascal. Yeah. And interestingly, THC Hydra, the password guesser, was his way of teaching himself to code in C. So he's like, I'm going to teach myself C. What do? I'm going to write a password guesser. And so he wrote THC Hydra out of those things. And he's just an amazingly interesting guy who talked through the origin stories of both those tools. I'm actually, is it tomorrow? Let me look at my calendar here. I think it's tomorrow, or no, it's next Monday. Yes. Next Monday, I get to talk to the creator of Wireshark. So we're going to talk through the origin story of that. And, of course we'll start out with Ethereal and hear about that tool. And of course, he's got some amazing stuff going on right now with LogRay. I don't know if you've seen any of the stuff with LogRay. That's I think that's going to change InfoSec completely, and much the way that packets PCAPs or it didn't happen.
Yep,
it's going to be syslogs or it didn't, or syscalls or it didn't happen. Right? So they're developing much like you have libpcap. They're developing libraries that are going to interface with the kernel and give you a standard format for all system calls. All of the user mode applications communicating with kernel mode applications into a standardized format. And they've brought in the same guy that wrote Wireshark, to write an interface to that API and into that system, and that's called LogRay. So I'm looking forward to talking to him about that and just the origin story of those things. But yeah, just I've had the opportunity to talk to so many interesting people, HD Moore, Tim Medine, and so many others. The most recent episode was talking with Phil Zimmerman, who created PGP. And of course, he almost went to jail for just writing that software and releasing it. Yeah. And then the most popular episode that I've posted was on CAPE, right? So Eric Zimmerman. I think I've hit all the Zimmermans in information security now. I apologize to any Zimmermans listening that I have not talked to. But he talked about CAPE and just the origin story of that tool, and that does such amazing things with forensics. But it's all short form documentary with lots of visual elements. So I go and find the old tools, and I try to get them compiled. Some of these old tools, getting them compiled and running to be able to show them, show you how they worked, and to do this. So for some of the old timers, there'll be some good nostalgia. For those who are new to InfoSec, I think it just helps to know where you came from, to know where you're going, to learn from the mistakes of the past, and so that's the goal of that podcast.
No, I think that's good, because even in this age of everything's recorded, like my kids have been documented throughout their entire childhood. Unlike, you and I, where that wasn't around a whole lot. So we are starting to lose some of those stories of, the creator who created Z. I actually, even my parents, I bought something called Storyworth, which just asks them a prompt and then it creates a book later. So I think you're doing a lot of the same stuff, where you're getting these people that maybe they've interviewed about it, but it gives a place to where they can dive in. You can learn some new stories and learn a lot of historical stuff. So I actually think that's kind of why I started this podcast too. Cause I was like, it wasn't as historical, but it's more like, let's dive into a topic and better understand it from, like, to your point, like you, for example, Python and automating Python. Like, you're, I think, seen within the InfoSec community as a person that's the go-to person for that, right? And it is kind of really interesting to see how willing people are to come on and talk about that stuff. So I think it's really great. I think is it just on YouTube that you're doing the podcast series, or?
It's just YouTube series. I mean, it's highly visual.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't know that it would translate well to just audio. But
no, they're really well done. I have a media arts degree, so I understand the editing and the effort that goes in behind even just doing video. I'm kind of a little bit lazy. That's why I don't want to do video for this podcast, because it's more editing I would have to then go do. Right. So.
Yeah, I wish I had some type of knowledge of video editing. Right. But that's, this is all like just learning it as I go. And I get some feedback. Hey, your audio is wonky, and things like that. And I'm like, all right, I'm working on it. So hopefully it'll get better as we go. But I do try and include a lot of visual elements. Like when, so I got to talk to Hobbit, the guy who wrote Netcat, and Ed Scotus. Ed Scotus was on the video with Hobbit and explained Netcat relays and things like that. So I did a lot of visual elements that show how Netcat relays pass data and how the command line arguments work to things. And so there's a lot of visual elements there, and that stuff took a lot of time. Yeah. With the story of Back Orifice, I kind of tried to turn that into a Lord of the Rings style adventure.
I see that. Yeah.
Did you watch that one?
I haven't watched that one, but I have it pulled up and I see like it's got the Eye of Sauron on it.
Yeah. So
no, that's really good. Yeah.
So that's one of my favorite ones from a time and effort put into. I actually commissioned an artist to write a poem about Back Orifice And the guy had no idea what back orifice was when he wrote this poem. So when you watch it, he did a great job in putting together this poem about back orifice in there. So you should watch that one. That one's fun. I try to keep them all to 20 to 30 minutes. Make them consumable too. Yeah. But then I'll release the unedited full conversations as well.
Oh, that's cool. That's awesome. Cool. Well, Mark, it was a pleasure. You want to go ahead and I guess you've kind of already plugged that, but what are the specific dates for the SANS conference in Las Vegas? You said September.
So I've got coming up several opportunities for you to come and join me at SANS SEC573 or SANS SEC673 in London. I've got a live online class that's being taught in the London time zone coming up in September 2nd. We've got SANS Las Vegas Network Security, which is September 4th. That's going to be 573 or 673. You'll be able to take 673 there from me or 573 from Mike Murr, who's going to be teaching there. I've got 573 coming up in Dallas in October 14th, and in Munich, Germany, October 21st, and then in SANS and Cyber Defense Initiative, you'll be able to take either 573 or 673, and that's running December 13th in Washington, D.C. All of those opportunities are coming up. And one more date to plug for you, which is B-Sides Augusta, Georgia. Right, I heard you talking with the organizer of B-Sides St. Louis in your last episode, and you were saying just don't do it in October. And I'm going to assume that you didn't want him to do it in October because you knew you wanted to come to B-Sides Augusta.
I go to B-Sides every year. It is my favorite. It is my favorite conference. I'm going to go ahead and say that it's Show Me Con's good too. I'd say that's up there because he's probably going to go listen to it and go, what did you say? But what I tell people is B-Sides Augusta is the most well-run conference I have ever been to, year in and year out. You guys do a really great job, and you guys have grown like crazy. The pandemic obviously hurt some of the numbers, but everyone's hurting from numbers. But you guys are one of the biggest B-Sides events in the world too that people don't realize, because you get over 1,000 people.
Yeah, it's right at around 1,000. We're hitting building capacity sometimes depending upon whether or not we have a room available. But yeah, so we've got a really good lineup of talks this year, and we're looking at a couple of workshops and things like that to run in these different events. So yeah, and I certainly can't take credit for the organization of those things. You got Lawrence Abrams is the president of B-Sides Augusta, and Phil Planamera, who's the COO of Security Onion, does really spearheads the organizational skills because he is a very organized person, whereas I'm not. And we always put it together with Security Onion conference so that we put those two events back to back so that people have more of a reason to come to Augusta, Georgia, than just the one conference. So it's more like 2 days of conferences. Although I'm not involved in it at all because there's a conflict of interest there, they do have training that's going on that week before, trying to give. So we're calling it Cyber Week in Augusta, Georgia. So
that's great. No, that aligns with Security Awareness Month too. So
yeah.
All right, man. And this is all 2024, by the way. So if you're listening to this in 2025, B-Sides Augusta is yearly, but the dates might change and all the SANS stuff is too. Yeah. So
yeah, I don't think I mentioned the date. Is it? What is the date?
It should be the first Saturday in October.
It's October 5th. Yeah, October 5th.
Yep. It lines up with my kids' fall break. Really great. So I bring the whole family down.
Excellent.
Cool.
Excellent. All right. Well, we look forward to seeing you there, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And thank you for joining me to discuss how to automate Python or use Python to automate information security. I don't know what the episode name is going to be yet, but it's something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good to see you again. Good to talk with you as always.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Take it easy, man.
And that will do it. Hopefully you learned something. If you didn't, email me at timothy.dblock@exploresec.com or reach out to me on LinkedIn and let me know what you didn't learn. And we'll cover it in a future podcast. We'll see you next time, Security Explorers.